The Phantom of Benguela, a tale of iron and ghosts. In the dry heat of 1913, the Benguela Railway was more than just a line of steel cutting through the unforgiving Angolan wilderness. It was a lifeline. Built by the hands of thousands of forced labourers, many of whom perished in the harsh conditions, the railway was meant to connect Africa's deep interior with the Atlantic coast. It was a symbol of progress, but for those who toiled in the dust and blood, it was a curse. Among the men working on the railway was a man named José. Unlike the others, he wasn't a labourer from the villages, but a Portuguese overseer, a cruel man who took pleasure in making the workers' lives as miserable as possible. The railway project had claimed hundreds of lives by the time José arrived, but his viciousness accelerated the toll. Whippings were frequent, beatings were routine. He demanded impossible quotas, and those who fell behind were left to die where they collapsed. The workers gave him a name whispered in their native tongues, O Diabo de Ferro, the Iron Devil. One evening, when the sun had dipped low and cast the land in long shadows, a group of labourers decided they could take no more. Led by an elder named Zuba, a man respected for his wisdom and courage, they gathered secretly in the jungle. The elder told stories of spirits, of ancient forces tied to the land, and of vengeance that could be summoned by the desperate. In their eyes, this was a time for desperation. Under the light of the moon, they performed a ritual deep in the forest, calling on the spirits of the ancestors, the restless dead who had fallen in the fields, and the souls trapped beneath the iron of the railway. They sought justice for the countless men who had been worked to death, for the bones buried beneath the tracks, and for the rivers stained red with their blood. The next morning, something shifted in the air. The workers, once hunched in misery, looked up to the skies with a glimmer of hope, while José felt a weight in his chest, a coldness that crept into his bones despite the blazing heat. That night the first whispers came. The workers, camped near the tracks, woke to the sound of a distant train, its whistle long and mournful, the clanging of metal echoing through the night. Yet no train was scheduled. The tracks, dark and empty, remained still. Some said they could see faint lights, like the glow of lanterns flickering along the horizon, only to vanish as soon as they looked. José dismissed it all as foolishness. He ridiculed the workers, calling them superstitious fools. But when the night came again, so did the sounds, this time louder, closer. The elders spoke of the spirits taking form, bound in the iron that had stolen so many lives. They warned that the phantom train was not a harbinger of salvation, but of vengeance. And as the nights passed, the spectral sounds grew nearer, the whistle more piercing, the screeching of unseen wheels almost unbearable. José began to unravel. He stopped sleeping, pacing the camp with bloodshot eyes, muttering curses to himself. He swore he saw figures standing along the tracks, shadowy men with hollow eyes, watching him from the darkness. The workers, too, noticed the change. His cruelty turned to frantic paranoia, but still he refused to leave. The railway had to be completed, and José would not allow himself to be broken by whispers of the dead. One night, the ghostly train came closer than ever before. The sound of its engine reverberated through the camp, as though the train were barreling toward them. The ground shook, and the smell of burning coal filled the air. José, in a delirious state, grabbed a lantern and ran toward the tracks, screaming into the night.
I am not afraid. You hear me? You are nothing. I built these tracks with your bones. You cannot scare me.
The workers watched from a distance, their eyes wide with fear. As José reached the edge of the jungle, the sound of the phantom engine reached a deafening pitch. He stood on the tracks, his hands shaking, his breath ragged, waiting for a train that no one could see. And then it came. The air seemed to split as an invisible force tore through the night. The workers saw nothing but José's body was thrown back with a violent, unseen impact. His screams echoed through the trees, cut short by the sickening crunch of bones. When the dust settled, all that remained was his mangled form sprawled across the tracks, his eyes wide open in terror, staring into the void. From that night on, the sounds of the phantom train never left the railway. Workers swore they could still hear its whistle, its iron wheels scraping against the tracks. And they told the story of Jose, the overseer who had dared to challenge the spirits of the railway and paid the ultimate price. The Benguela Railway was finished, but the tracks were never silent. Each night the ghostly train still roams those rails, a harbinger of the past's brutal legacy, a reminder of the blood that built it. To this day, people in Benguela speak in hushed tones about the phantom train, never seen, only heard, carrying the souls of the dead, bound to the iron that stole their lives. And if you listen closely on certain nights when the wind is just right, you can still hear the Iron Devil's final, anguished scream.